getting to the heart of protests across the U.S. and Tucson.
What kind of world can we exist in if we are not allowed to even breathe?
Law enforcement leaders on restoring trust within the community.
I heard the pain that people feel.
And in his own words, a local artist shares his solution to the crisis.
Of course people are gonna, we're gonna be upset. We're having to relive these memories every single time, and you keep showing it to us every single time.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Tony Paniagua, filling in for Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. With a statewide curfew in effect, demonstrations persisted in Tucson in response to the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. This week, we set out to understand the root cause of these protests, along with the city of Tucson's response. In Tucson, protests that started peacefully last week led to conflicts with police. Ensuing damage in Tucson and the Phoenix metropolitan area resulted in Governor Ducey declaring the state's emergency curfew order.
Arizona will not confuse peaceful protesters and demonstrators with looters and rioters.
What's his name? Why are we here?
Days following, demonstrations continued in memory of George Floyd.
It was in live time of a person's breath being just stopped.
Including a vigil that drew hundreds in Tucson, crying systemic racism.
We are humans. Treat us like such.
So we are in the process of talking to the sheriff department, to the police department, to the mayor, to bring about some changes, because we have systemic racism in Tucson and in this country. It's now more hidden than when I was younger. We knew our place, but my place is wherever I want it to be today.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
More events followed.
The movement has always stood and been in the hands of the youth.
As demonstrations continue, we heard from community organizer and Black Lives Matter Tucson member Lola Rainey about the outcry. She starts with her reaction to Floyd's death.
I think what it says, it's hate. It's hateful. It is twisted, perverse. It is the type of inhumanity that can only exist in a culture that has lost its way, lost its soul. It's a dead soul. So part of America is dead. It has been dead for a long time. The soul of America has been dead. And that's why you have people in the streets. We're saying, you cannot continue to extract all this from us and to deny us even the ability to live, to breathe. What kind of world can we exist in if we are not allowed to even breathe, to be able to walk down the street without being profiled and murdered by state agents?
Is this case with George Floyd, do you think, going to really make a difference this time around? Because I know we've heard about these things happening before, and we hear, oh, everybody's going to get galvanized. We're going to have discussions. There's going to be action. There will be a change. Do you think this might make the difference?
I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that each time we have these eruptions, these violent types of episodes, the country becomes more destabilized. So this is what I see us moving towards, either a solution or an end. This country cannot maintain its standing in the world. It cannot be a world leader with all this internal turmoil and conflict. How can you maintain social order when there's that type of resentment and anger?
How do we change this outrage, this turmoil, this pain into a positive outcome? Is there a way to get started in that direction?
Well, it begins with asking everyone, what are you willing to give up to build something better? Because we cannot go back to doing the status quo, business as usual, what we were doing before you saw George Floyd's life being taken from him. Now that was a moment, a call to consciousness. And either you as an individual recognize that if we are going to move forward as a united nation, not a fractured and broken nation, that each of us is going to have to do something different about how we treat each other, how we talk to each other, the types of ideas that we allow to exist in our country, the hatred, the ugliness that is everywhere, that we turn on TV or we watch some of our leaders speak with such vitriol and such ugliness about people who are our neighbors. If we permit that to happen, then I think it's going to be hard to change. But we have within our power the ability to say no more.
Any closing thoughts?
I think that this is a moment of reckoning. It's one last chance to become what we said we wanted to be, what we said we promised people that we were going to be, a nation that is inclusive, a nation that believes in freedom. We said a lot of things, but we haven't lived up to it. And we need to hold each other accountable for what we have not done and what we've allowed our leaders to do to our country in our name. Do not allow them to speak these hateful, horrible things and do these horrible actions in your name. Say no more. Say, I will not tolerate it. I will stand and I will fight to protect what is good about this country. And that's, in spite of what people are thinking when they see folks in the streets, they're fighting for you. They're fighting for us. Don't hate on them. Recognize that they have been driven to a place where they feel this is the last resort. This is what we have to do. But they're doing it not just for themselves, they're doing it for all of us. So I say thank you.
And all of this on top of a global pandemic.
And all of this on top of a global pandemic. And people not having jobs, and people getting ready to they're being houseless, and all these stressors that are eroding the spirit of people, of working people. We have gone through it. We've gone through something, but you know what? We've also survived some hard things, and I think we have the ability to survive this and come out better. But it's up to us.
Lola Rainey, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tucson police arrested 19 people the first night of protests on a variety of charges that range from obstructing streets to aggravated battery on an officer. They have also arrested about a dozen people for violating curfew. Christopher Conover spoke with city officials about what happens next.
It was up to the Tucson Police Department to quiet the violence and vandalism last weekend while letting the protests continue. Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus says the curfew put in place by the governor has helped.
I think the test will come in if we have larger protests where you have a small group that breaks off to cause trouble, particularly after dark. Usually most of this starts after 9 p.m. So I think we still have some tests ahead of us, but I think it's safe to say it has been helpful.
Whether or not the curfew was needed to cover all of the city of Tucson is something Mayor Regina Romero questions.
I don't think that an 8 p.m. curfew throughout the state was necessary. Here in Tucson, we have seen violence, and the chief of police was thinking of recommending a curfew for Tucson, but delegated to a certain area of the city.
The Tucson Police Department said the violence and vandalism associated with the Saturday night protest left about $200,000 worth of damage in downtown and along 4th Avenue. But that hasn't been the point of these events, as seen on Monday night when hundreds of people gathered at the Dunbar Pavilion for a vigil. Among them was Magnus, who says he was there to listen.
I heard the pain that people feel related to systemic racism, to contexts that that they've seen involving the police, not so much here in Tucson, but certainly in other places, particularly around the country, and the feeling of really being potentially a victim of police violence, and in some cases having already experienced that.
Romero also attended. Like the chief, she was there to listen and show her support.
It's absolutely necessary to make the voices heard of our African American brothers and sisters throughout the nation, especially here in Tucson. That's what's important. Right now, politics doesn't play a role.
Magnus says he was disgusted by the video of George Floyd's killing. He says not only are TPD officers trained not to put their knees on the necks of people, he says other officers would not have stood by and let that happen.
We do more than train. It is in our policy. It is an absolute expectation. And it's incorporated into training as well. But it's something that we look for in any situation where we have to use force to make sure that that force is not excessive, or to make sure that officers are not going further than they need to go in terms of using the least amount of force necessary to make an arrest, for example, or handle a situation.
Magnus says Tucson police officers are all trained in first aid and expected to provide it if they cause harm by excessive force. The Tucson Police Department has a force review board that looks at complaints of excessive use of force.
We're always open to feedback. We're not perfect.
He says listening is essential to maintaining the public's trust in his force. Democrats in the state legislature are urging the governor to call a special session to look at reforming police practices. One thing the chief says needs a second look is qualified immunity. That's the legal doctrine that keeps police officers and other government officials from being sued for actions they take on the job. The U.S. Supreme Court is currently debating taking up a number of cases which could change how qualified immunity is administered to police officers.
I think some tweaks are appropriate. I think there's some reasons for qualified immunity which are more complex sometimes than the public understands. But I think that immunity and the use of that may have gone too far at this point.
Changes for minority communities are about more than just policing. It's about an overall attitude in the city.
We are also starting to work on an equity audit in the city of Tucson that Councilmember Santa Cruz is leading.
Before that work is finished or the memory of George Floyd fades, the city will have another racially charged issue to deal with. The U.S. Supreme Court decision before the end of the month on the future of DACA, when again protests could erupt and the police department's tactics could be tested.
Current protests began in the name of George Floyd, but they underscore long-standing issues with our nation's institutions. Whether this movement leads to change remains uncertain, but history could offer some indications. We discuss how protests have shaped policing protocols over the years with Jennifer Earle, a professor of sociology at the University of Arizona.
Well, I mean, in some ways, we're in a very different place than we were 50 years ago, and we can thank protest for that. In many ways, we are also in some of the same places that we were 50 years ago, and we can thank various frictive forces that work against institutional change for that. And so I want to say something that's going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. On the one hand, protest is incredibly important and potentially quite impactful, and we can document lots of instances of particular protests, but many of the problems that we're talking about that initiated this round of protests and that also are happening during the protests are problems with policing that we've seen for a long, long time, suggesting that the changes that have been made haven't gone far enough and that we need to do some real thinking about maybe body cameras, which the research shows aren't terribly effective at reducing police misconduct. Maybe some of the solutions that people have hopped on are not the big picture thinking we need and the practical change at the same time we need.
We often hear from people say, I'm totally 100% behind peaceful protesting. But when you start looting, when you start committing crimes against other people and damage to property, that's a different story. It crosses the line. And yet you hear from protesters saying, well, we've tried very peaceful, very soft ways of trying to have our voices heard, but that hasn't worked. Is there some kind of a middle ground in this case?
Historically, looting and property damage that is unrelated to police action prompting escalation is pretty rare. I mean, it's not that it never has happened, but it is not as common as people think. Like, people have this iconic image of like a 1960s or 70s riot, and huge amounts of property damage. And historically speaking, those peaceful protest is way more common. And so when people look at looting or property damage or violence during protests, they're bracketing a particular kind of property damage, a particular kind of property reappropriation. So to give your viewers a sense of a comparison, and I'm not making a legal comparison here, I'm just trying to set property expropriation in a wider perspective. Right now, civilian law enforcement agencies in the United States take huge amounts of money through civil asset forfeiture. In 2014, law enforcement actually took more money through civil asset forfeiture than burglars stole in property in the United States. And I think what the movement is really calling for, as I understand it, is for us to take a step back and say, okay, if we're trying to talk about how do we reduce violence, let's talk about not just how do we reduce protester violence, but how do we reduce police violence. If we want to talk about the reduction of looting, how do we reduce what would be legally defined as looting, but also the way in which many poor people and people of color have assets taken away from them legally in the United States.
And we have heard from people about how the incident with George Floyd is not unique. It's not new. It has happened in the past. And there has really not been a consistent or serious change moving forward. Do you think this is going to be a different case when it comes to moving forward and making some changes?
Well, we're already seeing some changes around the country. We saw yesterday, I think it was, the LA mayor announced reductions to the budget for LAPD that was going to be reinvested in communities of color. We've seen individual police officers fired around the country for their misconduct, but we also see other departments where you can watch a lot of videos of NYPD officers who are beating people who don't appear at all attached to protests. You could find them attacking media. You could find similar videos in other places. And so I think we're looking at a situation where there are some signs of progress in some places and some signs that things are still stuck in other places. Unless the federal government were to change some fundamental legal structures that govern how local police departments do their business or what they have to do in order to get federal money, you will see these very decentralized changes because that's the nature of policing in the United States.
Dr. Jennifer Earle, Professor of Sociology, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
On Arizona 360, we have visited the issue of civility over the years. Now we ask once again how we as individuals can help our country heal and bridge racial divides. Our insight comes from Keith Allred, Executive Director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse in Washington, D.C.
A productive and an accurate way to kind of look at those protests is to say, you know, these are folks who are asking us to listen to their concerns, to listen to our own hearts when we watch that video and the reaction we have, and to say, hey, there's a problem here we need to address.
So it sounds really simple, but it's basically a matter of getting to know people who you perhaps don't normally associate with. Talk to somebody from a different ethnicity, a different religion, a different race, and see what their experience is about. And as you say, listen to them versus trying to inject your own opinions.
I think that's exactly right, Tony. And it is fundamentally simple. As a freshman in college 37 years ago, I was rooming with a black man who grew up mostly in the South and in the DC area. I'm a fifth generation Idahoan white guy who grew up working on the family cattle ranch. No doubt the college put us together, but we chose to take classes together and we'd go skiing and go to the beach, and we were there to support each other. But, you know, we never really talked very deeply about race. And it wasn't until I saw that video and was thinking, you know, we do need to reach across these divides and listen to each other. And I called Alden and I said, would you just talk to me about what it's like to be Black in this country? It was one of the most amazing conversations I've had. And the first story he told me was about he and another friend of ours coming to pick me up at the airport. I was coming back to school, and our other friend, Dan, was driving and was speeding and got pulled over. When the cops came up, they didn't come to the driver's side where our white friend was driving, but they came to Alden's side and asked him for his ID. And across Alden then looked across at Dan and said, "Are you okay?" And Dan said, "Well, yes, I'm okay." And Dan, our white friend who was driving, was outraged by this and was getting ready to get out of the car to go tell the policeman that he thought that was wrong. And Alden said, "Dan, please don't." That happened 37 years ago. He didn't tell me about it. He didn't want to talk about it. It was embarrassing to him. So I just heard that just this week. And as we had that conversation, he told me other stories about what it's like to be Black in this country. There was a level of understanding that I achieved that I hadn't before.
And Keith, on your website, it says that even though there seems to be so much division and rhetoric that's been going around, people are actually more unified, or at least they're craving that unison more than we might think. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, one thing that, we need to note is that the media, the traditional media, social media, always gives an outsized impression to the extremes. And the extremes talk louder and longer than the rest of us. They post more on social media. And so they get more attention. I mean, if we just talk politically, 40 to 45% of the country consider themselves independents. It's more than either Republicans or Democrats. And we're tending to hear from the extremes on the right and the left, and it can give us a misimpression of just how much common ground there is, and undermine, a good foundation for hope that we share more in common than we think, and that can be a basis for moving forward.
And the National Institute for Civil Discourse has developed a strategy, a multifaceted strategy to address this. Can you briefly tell us what that's all about?
One program we have is called Common Sense American, and this is where citizens can join up left, right, and center. We have over 15,000 Americans who have joined just in the last year and a half. And it's where we work together in some kind of efficient online ways to find and champion solutions wise enough to attract broad support. And we've been having quite a bit of success on that right now, so people can join and take part in that. The second program we have is called Engaging Differences, and it's where we kind of make the case, remind ourselves of what we all know from our youth, that we really are better off when we engage our differences constructively. And then we also provide sort of some of the skills and how do you do that effectively. And so all those materials are available online at our website.
All right, Keith Allred, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tony. Good to talk to you.
We end with a return to our occasional series, Own Words. Our commentary this week comes from local artist Sean Louie, who answered a question we posed about what it's like to be Black in the United States. The California native moved to Tucson nearly a decade ago and has since made his mark as founder of the Black Renaissance, a collective of Black artists across Arizona that showcase their work throughout the year.
When I first came here in Tucson, I didn't see any Black people, which is actually, I thought was really interesting. And then as I'm getting older and I'm meeting more people, it always seems like I realize that every non-Black person has a Black friend they know, but those Black people don't know other Black people, if that makes any sense. We're all separated by it. So I just began meeting people like crazy. I call myself just a curator because I keep finding all these amazing artists, and I just put them together and I go, world, look at these people, look at them, they're amazing. some black people were poor in the black community, and the black community obviously was poor, but some black people were poor inside white communities, and I realized that I was one of those people. So I thought that because I was hanging out with all these, with my rich white friends, I was shielded, but every now and then it'd be like a spike. So one instance would be there's an area in Seal Beach that even to this day, I don't like driving down there because I always get pulled over. The other instance, probably the most recent one, driving actually from Arizona to California to go to a photo shoot for some magazine, and I was shooting in Redondo Beach. And I'll never forget the expression on the guy's face. The cop pulled me over. He looked at me and he goes, "Hey, what's up, man? Sorry, you know why I pulled you over?" Like, no, I don't know why you pulled you over. He goes, "There's been a string of robberies inside the neighborhood, and you look like you don't belong there." And he saw in my face, and then he looked at me, and then I remember him saying, my sergeant wanted me to pull you over, so that's why I pulled you over. And I was like, all right, man. But he knew that I knew that he pulled me over only because I was black, and it was like one of those times where the cop recognized that he was doing something wrong and then passed the buck off to the sergeant, right? And I'll never forget. I was like, man. So to this day, I haven't gone back to that same beach. These traumatic events that happen that we keep seeing on social media triggers memories. And I'm talking to my other, people in the black community, and it keeps triggering memories. So like stuff that we forget, because our brain makes sure we forget, they keep triggering these memories, and I keep remembering them. So then I have to really, calm down or think about something else, distract ourselves, and that's why a lot of us, of course people are gonna, we're gonna be upset. We're having to relive these memories every single time, and you keep showing it to us every single time as a reminder. There's gonna be a divide now, because some people are still really about the system, don't forget, and because it makes them comfortable. So they're like, well, I don't want to change the system because I'm making so much money. Why would I want to say Black Lives Matter when all lives matter, everybody? The solution, and I keep saying this over and over again, the solution really is to empower black queer women, empower those black people in the LGBTQ plus community, and give them the space and the lead and the pathway. Open up the lane and let them do it. They'll lead it. They say this every single time, every single protest, every single time that something like this happens. Black queer community stands up. Black queer community stands up. Black queer women stands up. Black women stands up, and everything all of a sudden becomes okay. So, again, there's a problem and there's a solution. This thing has opened up some minds, but if we can just keep empowering the black queer community, keep doing it, man, we'll be good.
That's all for now. A reminder to visit our website, azpm.org, to stay up to date on our coverage of the protests, as well as information on the pandemic. Thank you for watching. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to Arizona360 at azpm.org and let us know what you think. See you next week.